Hi, I'm Dr. Christopher Newman. I'm Professor of Space Law and Policy at the University of Northumbria in Newcastle in the United Kingdom. I'm also International Space Law Advisor for Cold Star Technologies. I listen to the Cold Star Project.
This show is for entertainment purposes only and is not what is termed professional advice. The Cold Star Project is proudly presented by the Operational Excellence Society. Cold Star Tech is a supporter of the OPEX Society, and Jason Kanigan is a member of its board of advisors. Talk with us at Cold Star Tech to find out what we can achieve together with your Lean Six Sigma or Operational Excellence programs. And check out opexsociety.org to learn more. The space industry is one that is in desperate need of partnerships right now. With the exception of one or two people, it doesn't have the oomph to get the job done. And what I mean by that is driving us towards having a truly commercial space industry. So my guest today, Rhonda Stevenson, is just the right person for this kind of job. She's very good at developing coalitions and thinking strategically in a way. I gotta say, she surprised me, right? I don't think the way that she does, and I am very eager to learn how. You'll actually hear that in this discussion. Rhonda is somebody that I've recently met and realized is like a good person to look up to, right? So let's have her on board. She is the CEO and president at Orbital Assembly Corporation, which is just doing some really amazing things in design and with off-the-shelf parts to create new results. And if we can get these things into usage, right? If we can get these things demonstrated that they function using some new thinking, then I think that we can really transform this industry and accelerate towards having that true commercial space industry that I mentioned. All right. She's been there for almost 2 years at Orbital Assembly, and we're going to talk about what they do there. We're also going to quickly discuss the Tau Zero Foundation, which is an organization that she is the president and CEO of as well. So, Rhonda, welcome.
I was hired by Orbital Assembly to join their team in April of 2021, and the company started becoming established in 2017, became the business that it is in 2019. I joined the team as an advisor in 2020 and was hired in 2021 as their CEO.
Yeah. So,
to answer your question with what the big why is, it was looking at where we're at in our capabilities with respect to the utilization of space and what that means, and seeing, what the needs were in the growing market and the soon to be economy. What are the biggest hindrances? And one of them is the expense of having sustained activity on orbit and beyond. And also in that sustainability, the impact that it has on human physiology. And so microgravity is great for a lot of business verticals, market verticals, but it doesn't like people. And so how do you resolve that in order to exploit an unlimited market? And so with that, the idea of having partial gravity and then being able to provide a hybrid gravity environment where those market verticals can take advantage of the benefits of microgravity, because there are materials that come together in microgravity in a superior way and make a superior product. How can we get to a scalable production of that type of enterprise, and also be able to have the staff on orbit in a way that it's not unhealthy for them to be up there for an extended length of time.
Okay, very good. Why do you think the team hired you as CEO as opposed to somebody else?
Because I'm awesome.
I mean, yeah, it's obvious. Okay. Was there anything about, you're at the top, the spearhead, right? Saying, hey, these are the priorities that we should work on. Anything in that area?
I think that there are some things that I'm very good at, and one of those is resourcing and bringing together a lot of unrelated components and putting them together in an organized system that yields a better result. You know, I do have a background in leadership and in grassrooting businesses and franchises, and so I have the entrepreneurial experience, and you know, there were a lot of different reasons that just collectively we found that we all work together great as a team, and you know, now are ready to do some pretty significant things with respect to hardware.
Okay, let's talk about Orbital Assembly's current projects. What kind of things are you able to share?
So we're, as a startup, you know, we've been in the trenches, the startup trenches that many are familiar with, and where we're at this time is ready to continue our acquisition of specific kinds of hardware, and we're really excited about that and having those assets. And we also, I can't talk about it yet, but we've also received a significant award that we're very excited about. We've, you know, always very mindful of, you know, what it is to be a startup and how to demonstrate what that productive maturity looks like. We've also recently added a new external board member that we're very excited about. And yeah, we just keep taking those steps moving forward.
Okay. For the person who's listening who hasn't looked at the website yet and has no idea what we're talking about, and we're using these business phrases, right? What's the word that we're looking for? Like space stations here? Real estate in space?
I would say versatile space platforms with gravity or with variable gravity.
Okay.
We have the capabilities to provide not only habitable, you know, stations with hybrid gravity, but working that backwards, we also provide versatile automated platforms. And with respect to what is a platform, well, a platform is anything that you would put on orbit that has a use case. And the versatility means that not only is it backwards or reverse compatible with current, you know, hardware that's on orbit, but then also has feed forward architecture that can interface with the things to come. And then also having more than one job, because at this time, the biggest need is more space in space.
Okay, so we're not just talking labs in space or hotels in space, but maybe even orbital construction platforms.
We are right. Yeah. We are talking labs in space. We are talking hotels in space, and we are also talking, you know, large flat platforms. We are talking large communication systems. All of the functionalities that enable those Earth to space, space to Earth, and then space to space logistics.
Okay. Very important stuff, people. I've been thinking about, and I will do this, a solo episode where I talk about the building blocks of stuff that we need in orbit to have a real space economy, a commercial economy, right? We need so many Lego blocks up there, like fuel depots and communications, and we've got a lot of this stuff like pretty much ready to go, right? Satellites with arms that can fly over and grab other things and that. And what Rhonda's talking about here, the lab space in space, for example, I believe that is a case of if you build it, they will come. If you put that up there, people will suddenly realize, yeah, that capability is there. We need to use it. I normally don't think that way about businesses, right? I'm like, verify, but you know, make sure there's a market there. But I do believe that exists, and this is one of those vital building blocks, Lego blocks, that we need for a space economy. You've been doing something very curious to me in the economic side or the fundraising side of business that I haven't seen before. And when you talked to me about it off camera, I was like, really, this is different. Because I come from the regular business world where you go and prove a concept and you get venture capital funding to pour fuel on the fire, and you do a lot more advertising, and that leads to a lot more business, and you know, everyone's happy, right? And then we have an exit down the line. In space, there's often this reliance on government investment, and Dr. Andy Aldrin and I have had several discussions on this show, and I have evolved my point of view with him because of that, right? That's been quite interesting over the last 3 years. And then here you are coming along with this idea about building business consortiums to work to attract investors. And I hadn't heard about that before in regards to space. So tell me about why you've adopted that approach and what it looks like and how it's going.
It's going great. We have over 65 vendors, providers, partners, and customers in what we would call a consortium. And it's not about a consortium necessarily, but it's the ability to demonstrate that as we build these larger volume platforms on orbit that are intended to provide sustained congress over time, not just sustainability, but sustained presence, because then that becomes more economically viable and more profitable. And so in that methodology, you must demonstrate an end-to-end ecosystem of partners, who are diversified in their launch and payload delivery capabilities, and who those launch, many different types of launch providers are. And then once you're on orbit, who are the folks that are partnered with you for your operations. We discuss having a very large volume on orbit to host on-orbit manufacturing for many different profitable market verticals. Well, that's great, but you have to have a plan for stowage and downmassing. It's not the model where everyone goes up in a capsule, does their thing, and everyone leaves and takes all their stuff with them when they go. For sustained activity, you have to have those logistics and those operations in place so you can get resupplies, you can have stowage in a place to put product or things that you are intending to return to Earth to sell. You need a plan for that. And then you also have to have a plan for the downmassing and what the logistics are around the downmassing. And so through many partnerships, we have this end-to-end supply chain ecosystem / dynamic where it makes this not just feasible, but several variables of how this all comes together, and not one of those is a one-off where there's only one representative or one provider of that critical piece, that there are several.
Okay, very good. I love the idea of like Jason's dollar and Rhonda's dollar are over here by themselves, don't do very much, right? But you get a bunch of Jasons and Rhondas and their dollars together, and now we've got 60 million of them, right? And now we can do something, right? It's a simple idea, and you've been living with it for a long time, but it's just not something that I've seen in space. So, so this is really cool. Why? And I know you're going to give me pushback on this question. Why is developing a commercial space business so darn hard?
Oh, come on, Oh, you're asking me okay, let's get into that. It's I hate saying, oh, I'm glad you asked that question, but I'm glad that you asked the question, because it sets up the ability to say, oftentimes where the public thinks you are, that's not really where things are. And the question, provides the opportunity to illustrate that Orbital Assembly and other companies that are trying to establish themselves as a producer of revenue and profit on orbit and beyond, we've had these capabilities since the mid-70s. We're utilizing products, materials, providers that already have space heritage, that spaceflight legacy heritage products. We're using those as the components, and that vetting has been ongoing for over 40 years. Not all of it, but most of it. And so with that, the companies that are trying to get out there, it's not that they're bringing something new to the fore, they're leapfrogging technologies, they're using existing technologies in a way that can continue to grow businesses, continue to develop systems and solutions for things that are more efficient. A perfect example of that is right now, one of the two most critical interests of most nations on Earth are the need for energy security and food security. And we have partnerships with companies that are energy companies, and we have partnerships with the companies that are agricultural companies, and on both of those being one, growing plants or cloned cells on orbit, because cloned cells grow better in a microgravity environment. Stem cells do better growing and being productive in a microgravity environment. So putting that all together, providing the platform, providing the end-to-end ecosystem so that these companies can take that next step and be profitable and thrive. None of that I've just discussed is something that we haven't had the capability for a very long time. We're utilizing it and configuring it in a different arrangement, but it's not new.
Okay. I think that's going to be a surprise to a lot of people, right? That you can use these commercial off-the-shelf products, COTS, you'll hear them called, and you're just putting them together in a different way. Because there would be some pushback from folks saying, well, wait a minute, aren't we stuck with this slow and expensive iterative process of taking things from one TRL level to the next, right? And now we have to get flight heritage. And you're saying, no, this stuff has existed a very long time. It can be put together. And so why aren't we doing that then? What is the block, in your opinion?
I think that there's a couple of blocks. One of those is that, NASA has always been the benchmark for progress in space, and it has been the example of leadership in that direction. NASA has never been funded adequately after we went to the moon. We won the Cold War, and the decision making that went behind cutting NASA's budget or not continuing to grow NASA's budget was directly related to not needing to get another win. And so they were never fully enabled to push as far as they wanted to. And a classic example of that was when I was, in the second and then in the fifth grade, the NASA representative would come and tell us about space, and we'd have a big assembly. And I remember clearly in the fifth grade, I already had the space bug. I already had the plan. But he was saying, hey, by the time all of you kids are going to graduate high school, we'll have settlements on Mars. And I'm like, great, because I'm ready, and they were saying that from a place of where they were at in their capabilities. And that was quite some time ago. So it goes back to funding of NASA, looking to NASA as being the benchmark for progress and articulating what capabilities are. And they've always been limited in their budget. So through example, they haven't been able to do everything that they can do. And then startups and commercial enterprise is very limited for those funding reasons, because a lot of folks believe, well, why would I invest in space? Because a typical investment is looking for a 3 to 5 year ROI. Why would I want to wait 11 to 20 years for the same ROI? So that's one part of it. The other part of it too, that I don't think that a lot of folks get enough understanding of how impactful this is. But now that we have a significant amount of diverse launch capacity, we don't have just one or two rocket companies now. There are many, and many more are coming on board. Plus, there are also alternative methodologies that are coming to the fore in payload delivery systems for on-orbit supply. And so with that, before 2017, we were looking at roughly $10,000 per kilogram to put mass on orbit. Now that number has come down significantly. And as these launch providers all come to the fore, those figures will continue to decrease. And so the staggering costs of launch have decreased and therefore make it more feasible from a financial standpoint.
Okay. It gets frustrating, right? Because like I hear from space venture capitalist Michael Mealing, if you go on the Hill and try and talk to some congressional staffer about space, most of them don't want to hear about it, right? So that's going to impact the NASA funding. And then if like you said, if NASA's not a part of somebody's marketing message, it tends to get ignored as not being serious. And is that our little bottleneck, right? Like, to me, I think, we've already proven this technology. You say we're going to put it together in a new combination, but the parts are good. So what's the big deal? But then there's some disconnect in going out and getting customers and getting financing to create this idea, right? And is that
Right.
because of that it has to be through NASA lens that's being applied to everything, or is it something else?
There's a little bit about that, because obviously this is new. These are a lot of these concepts, whether it's offering refueling platforms on orbit to space mining. It's not been done yet, but that doesn't mean that we've lacked the capability and we have to leapfrog a technology to get there. We have the technology, and we have had the technology since the Apollo era. Moving that forward, looking to NASA as an institution that is intended to be a counterpart to other government institutions, was never set up to do the things that they have risen to the task to achieve. And that's fantastic. But because of the budgetary restrictions, they haven't been able to meet a lot of stretch goals. That's not to say that other commercial enterprise can't participate in the process, and now it's a lot easier for them to start. Where a lot of the institutional bias comes from is not understanding that. And then at the same time, many of those same people coming back and saying, well, why are we funding space when there are starving people or homeless people, or the human needs on Earth exceed the need for space exploration. And I my response to that is that, again, space is not about space. Space is being able to use the utility of the microgravity environment in our ecosystem to bring benefit to everyone on the planet, and improve the lives of every man, woman, and child on the Earth. That is the objective. The objective is to not go to a far-flung planet and turn over rocks, although that is interesting. That's not the objective.
Right. Yes. Science for the sake of science, is wonderful. Right. But when I see the lunar plans for creating a lunar economy, and it's sort of like, well, go deal with the ice and create fuel and something magical is going to happen there, I don't think you build it and they will come, right? I think there's a little more needed there than just show up and suddenly there'll be an economy there. Do you think, and again, this is just a question that popped into my head, like if NASA doesn't think you can do it, would the FAA or something just decline your launch or something? Like, what? I've never really thought about this before. Would they use some administrative thing to block you?
Well, we have established a relationship with the FAA, and what the FAA does is they regulate the payloads, and they just want to make sure that they're regulating it from a standpoint of, if there was a failure at any point in the launch process, what would be the detrimental outcome of anything coming back to the Earth. And so that is what the FAA is regulating. They're not looking at your feasibility. They're not judging your business case. They're not putting their own 2 cents in about whether or not you think that this will be a success. But what they are making sure of is that, should the launch fail, are people on Earth, relatively speaking, going to be safe?
Okay, thank you for explaining that, because as we were going along there and I was thinking, I realized that's an area I don't know much about. Maybe I need to go find an FAA person, because I'm not enamored with launch, right? Launch is fine. It's necessary. It's important. And I get frustrated in the Facebook groups and stuff like that on space, because all they talk about is launch. And I'm like, space is so much more, right? There's so much more going on in here than just launch. So I've kind of stayed away from that. But like when I wanted to learn about ground station operations, I went and found a ground station operator and interviewed him for this show. And that told me what I needed to know, right? So that might be an area. Okay. But I'm wondering still about the pitch to to investors and how that could be improved, because I feel there's an opening there. So anyway, you and I could discuss that off camera. But,
what I would say to that is, I talk to people every day, and over the course of the last 2 years, I have a lot of recurring conversations with lots of different types of investors. And in those conversations, where I find the most prejudice are those affiliated with aerospace. Because again, there's that institutionalized bias that if it were that easy, or if it were that possible, NASA would have already done it. But that's not what this is. And so it's not a conversation of capabilities. It's a conversation of funding. Because if NASA had had the funding, they would have. But they didn't, because they didn't have the funding.
Right.
And now they too are pivoting to what is available commercially in order to achieve those objectives.
Yeah. Okay. So the area I keep walking over is, if NASA didn't do it because they didn't have funding, what's to stop a commercial company from getting customers and doing it now? Are we just not doing a good job in finding customers yet?
Okay, so working that backward, everyone gets tired of hearing someone say, "Oh, it's a chicken and egg problem," because that sounds like an excuse. For us, it's not an excuse. It's just part of the dynamic. In order to get more investment, we have to demonstrate that we have customers. In order to get the customers, they want to know what our pro forma and what our investment, process looks like, and where we're at in our stage. And those are all very fair and valid. But, getting customers that need more space on space is one of those markets. One of the markets right now that I keep getting right there, but then we don't have a chance to explore that. But right now there's a tremendous bottleneck for platform and access to the International Space Station for research and development. And there's a demand for more frequent cadence. And so with those problems, there's a whole battery of customers that want to get there, but are looking at least a four-year term before they can achieve that, if whatever it is that they want to put on the ISS doesn't raise any flags. Like if there are no obstacles because of the type of material or the energy demands, or those types of dynamics, that bottleneck is huge. That bottleneck is only going to grow. There are 8 billion customers on the planet. So the demand for more space in space, once it becomes available, will only increase. And so that is an unlimited market. And a lot of times I find myself dropping down into the one-off conversation of, well, once you do this, then you're done, right? It's like, no, this is a system. This is something that continues to scale forward, but it's not a one-off. We can duplicate this effectively and with efficiency. And with that bottleneck at this time, we're in conversation with cases to become an adjacent implementation partner for that very reason, because the only two habitable long-term habitable platforms on orbit are China's station and the International Space Station.
Right. And there was just some news today coming out about the Chinese space station. Certain people will not be going there. Okay, thank you for that meaty example. I got a lot out of it, because again, like, is the issue in the upfront costs, and we just can't find people who are willing to divide that upfront cost amongst themselves, in payment, for future access?
That's again, great question. And the reason why that's a great question is because of the assumptions. The assumption is that space is horrifically expensive, and for the same amount of dollars, you could have something else that is more impactful in the near term. The other part of it is that the time, the time to delivery, the length of time that it takes. Again, with that bias, and particularly with aerospace inclined investors, we can walk them through the numbers. We can show them, I can do this in this amount of time, and it will cost us this much to execute. And it's orders of magnitude lower in cost and very short in a timeline where these objectives can be met. And because of their institutionalized bias, which is not a bad thing, it's what they know, and they haven't experienced anything different yet, you can show them the figures. You can say, these customers, these vendors, they quoted me these products. We do this, and this is what you get. It takes this much time. It costs this much money. And they're like, no. And it's not because it's personal. It's not a judgment on what we're doing. It's simply because that's the way it has always been, because that's what has been able to produce thus far.
And so they don't believe it can be done.
Not all of them. I mean, and then there's some that are like, great, you guys are being really optimistic with your timelines.
Okay. Well, as an operational excellence guy and a member of the board of advisors of the Operational Excellence Society, I can tell you most of the time in production is in queue time, right? That's true for any manufacturing process, right? And so if you can kill the queue time, you can make that manufacturing time much shorter, right? The total time. And so if Orbital Assembly has done that for these labs in space, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be possible, you know? But again, engineers are often not operational excellence people. So,
well, and I think that part too, you know, with a lot of companies that are for making their foray into space, you know, having that business plan, that model that demonstrates, you know, your roadmap with your hardware and all of that. A lot of these things have a lot of stake in IP. And there's a lot of comments out there about, you know, not just ours, but other companies being a PowerPoint company because they don't have anything real. And it's like, no, they have the vendors teed up, but if they tell you who their vendors are, then it becomes competitive and they can't protect their price point. Sometimes they are PowerPoint, but most of the time they're not. With us, we're about to make a significant product announcement, but with that, we have a specific hardware catalog that says, you know, this is the product, this is the TRL rating, this is, you know, the heritage and legacy behind it, you know, this is it. So that when we show a rendering of what the design could look like, we're not giving away what it actually looks like. We're protecting our IP, but then we're also demonstrating the measurable steps and the partnerships that are going to get us there. The other part is sanity check. Last year we had a company come in and vet all of our statements and all of our figures, and you know, they were very external to say, you know, can we defend these statements? Can we meet these deadlines? Did we get these quotes? And that was the other part, is a lot of times there's an assumption with the timelines and the costs that they're wrong costs. And all of ours are based on specific quotes that we've negotiated with these partners. So again, the assumptions are biased based on what has been achieved thus far, which is not accurate of what is possible.
Right. And yeah, new things are not achievable until suddenly they do get achieved. So
exactly.
Just because you haven't seen it before. And I have to tell this to myself a lot too. Doesn't mean that it's impossible or untrue or whatever. Okay. That was great. I think we dug into a lot there, and I think we could even talk more about it. What do you wish space business founders would know or understand before or just as they're getting into their startups?
A lot. Yeah, I think that I have not yet met anyone who is in the trenches of space startups or just in the space community as a whole that does not share a common goal to, you know, absolutely ensure that civilization becomes permanent in spacefaring. And everyone has a different idea based on their own perceptions and experiences of how that's achievable. And so when companies begin, even if they have a long-term far-off objective, they still need to have those incremental steps just from the ground to on orbit. What are those incremental steps? And what are the terrestrial activities simultaneously that bring value to help you build a better, foundation for a startup company? And then how do you scale to on orbit or suborbital? What does that look like? And who are your customers? Being really crystal clear on who your customers are. And then once you're on orbit, what are all the do's? There's all the could be's. There are all the possibilities. But in the near term, what are the specific demands and the specific requirements of the entities up there right now that would create a situation to be revenue positive and profitable in a near term time? One of the things that I think is not often said enough is, yes, there's competition. Yes, it's chippy. Yes, the funding is even more scarce in space industry than other pursuits. And so, yeah, it gets a little rough and tumble. But inevitably for this ecosystem, it's critical that all of these companies succeed, not just one, but all of them, because that is part of that robust space economy that we are all pushing for. And in order for that to happen, those ecosystems, that synergistic symbiosis needs to be fostered and nurtured. So don't be afraid to build those partnerships, even if you think that they're a direct competitor, because inevitably those partnerships have the crossover that you need that will carry you both forward.
Yeah, so some little capability over here doesn't take your lunch money away. Can help you later on. What you said about know who your customers are. That's the number one thing I wish people would know. Yeah.
Well, and I think a good example of that is, who are your customers on Mars? I know the answer to that, but selling that is hard. But if you say my customers on the ground are this population, my customers suborbitally, potentially, whatever, depending on the business, are these customers. My customers on orbit are specifically, these customers, and they represent these market verticals, and each one of these market verticals has this unlimited potential. And then what does that mean for cislunar? What does that mean for the moon on, the lunar surface and beyond? Everything needs to be scalable. You don't just,
so you're thinking in layers. Yeah,
it has to be layered. And there has to be some interconnectivity. And until funding is robust, you also have to have a conversation about the as above, so below kind of dynamic of, that's great that you're going to have hotels in space for people of high net worth, but how is that helping anything that's happening on Earth? And then you walk it backwards and you start discussing solutions for energy and food security and pharmaceuticals. What would it be? What would it be worth to the average person who's losing their sight? And that could be recovered by the replacement of retinas that are grown on orbit. What would that mean to you? And what wouldn't you spend to make sure that you continue to have your sight? That is one of the capabilities that can be provided by on-orbit enterprise, but there's not enough understanding of how near term and how accessible that really is.
Okay. This is very interesting. I keep coming back to that messaging, right, as being so important, having the right pitch person, basically. I don't like that word pitch, but it kind of matches for this, Willie Mays, come on, let's do this sort of thing, right? Okay. Because and thinking back to who's your customer and these layers, that was educational for me. During the summer of COVID, I did like 2020, I did a whole bunch of free calls with space founders, and we would perpetually get to this point where I'd be like, so who's your customer? And they'd be like, oh, I don't know. And then they'd be like, Jason says, get a customer, right? And like, you have 20 of those in a row and you start to go a bit berserk as a founder, right? And somebody trying to give advice. Nobody's going to give you $200 million just to invent this thing. Not in isolation. If you take that away from what Rhonda and I are talking about here, that would be the number one thing, I think. Build it out.
That is the perfect statement, because what that looks like, right, are again the biases that a lot of folks come with, where they see our gorgeous rendering of Voyager station, and they think, oh my gosh, that's $100 billion and that's going to take you 50 years. And it's like, well, no, we did some research, and it starts on the ground, and it's scalable. And, we have incremental steps, and we have vendors, right? So no one is just going to show up and build that, right? That doesn't happen. But is the product roadmap, are the funding objectives sequenced in a way that are rational, meritable, and achievable? Most certainly, yes. And the believability that the end result is to have propellant depots on orbit, or to have space-based solar power, or to have beamed power or beamed energy capabilities from the ground to orbit. All of that, because it hasn't been done, it sounds so speculative to someone who's not in the know. But again, it's not leapfrogging technologies, it's utilizing things that are available today. And so with that, having the fundable benchmarks that are still within the 6, then to the 7, and then to the 8 figures in those incremental steps is also a key component. What can you do with $500,000? What can you do with $10 million? What can you do with $25 million? What can you do with $100 million? Right? Yeah. So if you can meet customers at every point along that financial roadmap, it's a lot easier, smoother conversation than I'm raising $500 million because I want to put something on orbit.
Right.
That's a hard conversation.
The answer is good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I like that, because again, this layered thing allows for exits at different levels, right? Which pleases those investors. And you can like crowdfund to a certain point, right? Customer fund, and then get venture capital, and then private equity, and go on from there. And everybody's happy. And the investors are going to love it that you've planned this out, right? At these various levels, because they're going to see, oh, you thought of me and my own self-interest, right? Folks, it is easy to go into the venture capital space and go get $200 million for some sort of banking software, right? Or an app, because these things are well understood and people have made money with them, and it's systematic. It's over and over again. But over here in space, I can remember the number's probably higher now, but a couple years ago, Michael Mealing telling me, Jason, if I had $20 million to deploy in space, I wouldn't know where to put it. Right. And that's very interesting. Right? I do believe that number has gone up. This was before the whole that SPAC with the horrible valuation that I still don't understand, and I'm pretty irritated about. But anyway, it's just a different world over here, and it is harder to get access to money, because you're thinking of the internet. You can remember the .com era, where that was the total Wild West, and people would put up a website with a domain and think that they were going to be zillionaires, right? And then that crashed, and then we had to figure out there was another layer on top of that, which was the app, right? And then that became normalized. And so I believe we've got to go through the same thing in space, right? We're not even at the .com bubble era yet in space, right? We haven't even reached that point yet. And so someday we're going to get there, and we're going to get to the app phase where, yeah, what do you mean? You just do this. It's normal, right? I do believe that, but it's going to take a while. Let's finish up with this, Rhonda. You've got something called the Tau Zero Foundation that you have the same sort of president and CEO role with. Tell us a bit about that, what it's for, what it does, and why you're involved.
The Tau Zero Foundation focuses on extended energy storage and advanced propulsion. And a lot of times when you say advanced propulsion, there's a misapprehension that means breakthrough propulsion. And that's not necessarily something that we're focused on. But with advanced propulsion and energy storage, again, it is a nonprofit. So it's looking at research and development of capabilities utilizing technologies that exist today. For example, one of the projects that we continue to hone and develop is the ability to get anywhere point to point in cislunar in 20 hours. And that is a capability that on paper we can demonstrate. No one is going to fund, a $100 million demonstrator mission, but they could most certainly fund a $15 million demonstrator mission to demonstrate that capability. So it's about being able to resource the research, the development, and the engineering for a capability like that. Well, why is that significant? Well, if you can achieve access to anywhere in cislunar in a very short amount of time, again, it's those incremental steps. What can you do on orbit that scales to cislunar? How is that impactful? And then from there, how can you start venturing farther afield using those same capabilities? So instead of it, having the energy and the propulsion capabilities to get you to Mars in a greatly reduced amount of time. I don't want to project how much time, but let's say that it wasn't an 18-month trip to Mars. Let's, think, well, what if it was a 3-month trip to Mars? How would that change our dynamic? And then being able to resource the researchers and the other companies that are exploring those types of advanced propulsion concepts.
Yeah, I really like your thinking about space. There's a lot of ebb and flow and rhythm in here, and these sort of concentric spheres of capabilities and timelines and that. It's different than my own way of thinking. I'm a very darty kind of thinker, right? I'm like, how do we get from here to there now, right? Yours is more holistic, so I've got a lot to learn.
Well, that was an evolution though, because it doesn't start like that. It's like, I want to go to Mars. Right. I don't want it to take me 18 months. I want to go now. Well, okay, how do you get there? Well, you got to work it backwards, and then that's where that process becomes integrated. You don't just go.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Rhonda, who do you want to hear from, and how can they get in touch with you?
I want to hear from anyone who is interested in orbital assembly, particularly investors. Thank you very much. And they can reach us at info@orbitalassembly.com. But I also want to hear from folks who want to learn more. I want to hear from folks who say, I hear you, but I don't quite understand, or I'm not quite making the connection between this and this. And the reason why I think that's relevant is once more of the general population has a better understanding of where collectively our capabilities are, that is going to influence the culture and the priorities around making this get better funding and nearer term support, and do the fostering that is required for all of these industries in space to become successful.
Yeah, and folks, this keeping track of the capabilities, right? I don't know how many leaders I've talked to who are very narrow, right, and deep, but they don't have the width in their knowledge, and they're like, Jason, I can't possibly keep up. And I get it, having been in this field for this long now, right? It's hard. I remember Nicole Shoemaker, who was at Texas A&M at the time, doing just collecting all the knowledge of the different people doing lunar and Martian and asteroid surface technology, right? And that's it. She went to go work for Joel Sercel after that. But like, she made a job for herself just capturing all this information in this one category, right? So it is understandable how the pace of what we can do has sort of galloped out past the vision of what people could see normally. So, Rhonda, I appreciate you doing this. I've enjoyed getting to know you, and I hope to learn more from you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks for listening and joining Rhonda Stevenson, President and CEO of Orbital Assembly, and myself. I'd also like to encourage you to go down to the description below, check out the links to their website, and also for the America's Future series, which is an ongoing series of discussions, some in person, some online, that are concerned with the national security of the United States and just creating a greater future for all of us. And I look forward to talking to you next time.